The death of Freddie Gray in 2015 was a flashpoint in the fight against police brutality that continues today. Gray died from injuries he sustained in a Baltimore police van. Protests erupted in Baltimore and across the country. A new book tells the story of what happened during the most volatile days through the eyes of 8 people. It's called 5 Days, The Fiery Reckoning of an American City. Author Wes Moore is also the CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, one of the nation's largest anti-poverty nonprofits. And he joins us first on CBS This Morning. Wes, good morning. I want to start. Freddie Gray's death was preceded the year before by Eric Garner's death, and then the unrest in Ferguson after the Michael Brown shooting. They really kind of set the table for what's happening now, if you will. Can you talk about how you think the protests after Freddie Gray's death impacted what we're seeing today?
I think unfortunately, we really are reliving history in many ways. And we're reliving history because we've continued to allow these tragedies to recede from our collective memory without collective action. And I think when we watch the images that we saw with Freddie Gray, and we think about what was different around Freddie Gray, because the truth is, in the 2 years prior to Freddie Gray, there was, in Baltimore alone, there was Anthony Anderson and Chris Brown and Tyrone West. So we watch these incidents happen and then quickly recede from a collective memory. I think what's happening right now is there is a level of impatience to any real seismic or systemic change to dealing with these issues, that the frustration has now continued to boil over. And I think the model that we're seeing from Freddie Gray actually serves as an important lesson of what happens if this emotion, if these actions actually then aren't followed up by real systemic change.
You said the Baltimore police force was not the cause of Freddie Gray's death, but rather the effect. What do you mean?
Yeah, what I mean is the history of inequitable policing is as old as this nation's history. I mean, when we're talking about the reality is that the sound of police sirens it has a different pitch depending on what neighborhood that you're in. But when we're looking at what happened to Freddie, it's important that we deal with the issues that caused his untimely death. It's important that we deal with the issues of policing reform. It's important that we deal with the issues of being able to address what happened in his death. But what I also mean, it's important that we understand what happened in his life. We have to understand the conditions that existed when you had a young man who was born premature, underweight, addicted to heroin, moved into a home after he gained enough weight to be able to leave the hospital. His mother never made it to high school. And then moved into a home that in 2009, that home and 400 other homes were named in a lawsuit because of the endemic levels of lead inside of this home. So we now had a young man who was born underweight, addicted to heroin, lead poisoned, and by this time in his life, he is 2 years old. And so what I mean by that is we have to deal with the issue of policing, but we also have to understand that it's not just enough to mourn his death. We've got to mourn his life. And we've got to be able to put together systems and structures that can make sure that young men like Freddie actually have a chance in our large society.
Yeah, you're right that in Baltimore, the odds started being stacked against Freddie generations before he was born. When you look at what's happening right now, Wes, do you think something really is different this time? Because as you say, we've watched this video so many times now in the last 5 years.
I think something is different, and I think the difference is that the bar is being raised. The bar is being raised as to what we identify as progress. You know, one common misperception, I think, about what happened in Baltimore 5 years ago is there's this idea that what calmed everything down was when the National Guard was called in. That's not true. The protests that were actually planned on the Saturday after the uprising that took place in Baltimore were set to be as large, or larger than any of the protests that we had seen thus far. What calmed everything down was when the state's attorney actually decided to press charges against the 6 officers. So there was almost this euphoric feeling in Baltimore that justice might actually be here. We actually might have people who are accountable for the death of an unarmed black man. That was able to calm everything down. There was a consent decree that was put inside of Baltimore where the Department of Justice very clearly laid out the patterns and practices of systemic racism and injustice that the police department was having on black communities. Here's the difference. Years later, no one was convicted for what happened to Freddie Gray. A consent decree was rolled back. And so I think the bar has now risen. Now what we're talking about right now is not just simply about charges being filed and consent decrees being filed. What we're talking about now are laws being changed. What we're talking about now is justice in every single form, not just justice in terms of policing, but justice in terms of economics, justice in terms of health. So the bar is now being risen as to what progress is, and I think people are being very, very clear about that.
Yeah, we should remind people that all of the officers involved in Gray's case were either acquitted or had the charges dropped against them. The Baltimore Police Department told us, we continue to make significant progress in implementing comprehensive reforms. Have they gone far enough, Wes?
I don't think that they would argue that they've gone far enough yet. I think we continue to watch individual and smaller movements on something that's a larger systemic problem. It's difficult for me to have a conversation about good apples versus bad apples when we have to reform systems. Good apples and bad apples don't exist when you still have systems that need to be uprooted. And I think what ends up happening is, we have a lot of people who are coming from a place of goodwill in this. We have a lot of people who are coming from, a place of sympathy and empathy towards what we're seeing. But we cannot confuse or in any way mistake good deeds as being enough to deal with larger injustices. And it's unfair when we do that. It was one of the reasons why I wanted to follow these 8 characters.
Wes Moore, thank you so much for being with us. The book, again, is 5 days. It's on sale June 23rd, my birthday. Buy it. We'll be right back.